afternoon, 69. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560. The Answer.
Sunshine and 48 right now. Next news, 7:30. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560. The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
So many questions. How did we get here? How did this happen? And how quickly will they reach a verdict? Good morning, Amy Jacobson here. John Anthony.
Hey.
In for Dan Proft. Are you like me? I kind of lost some sleep. I woke up at 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Kind of a little panic-stricken about this Trump trial.
Oh, no.
Because the jury instructions are unbelievable.
Yeah.
And Dan talked about that yesterday, that this is in the 55-page jury instruction kit, which they cannot physically have a copy of, which makes no sense. But part of it says, quote, to reach a guilty verdict, they need not be unanimous as to what those unlawful means were.
Of course.
So just say it's a major advantage for the prosecution.
Yeah, of course. Imagine being a prosecutor, the prosecutor in that case, and hearing that, like, wait a minute, wait, did he just say what I thought he said?
Well, Vivek Ramaswamy, I don't think he's losing sleep because he thinks that everything's going to be okay. There's two scenarios of what can happen here.
I think either outcome is going to favor President Trump, and here's why. Once that outcome is behind us, people will see in the not guilty case, what are they going to see? This was a sham trial. This was a trial where Alvin Bragg made a commitment to voters saying that he was going to go after Donald Trump. You name the man, I'll show you the crime. That was his mentality. That's exactly what he did. In the case where he's convicted, nobody in the United States of America could still possibly tell you what exactly was the crime that Donald Trump committed. And if he's being sentenced on that basis, they will see the injustice of that as well. So this has backfired as it should. And thankfully, we will be able to end the weaponization of justice when Trump wins that next term.
You know, it's amazing. People forget Bill Clinton's
that music follows him wherever he goes.
Yeah.
But that does make sense.
It does.
But the White House, I believe, is just really intent on getting the label of convicted felon.
Correct. And that's been the goal from the beginning.
With more on this, let's welcome back to the program John Malcolm, Heritage Foundation's Vice President for the Institute for Constitutional Government. Good morning, Mr. Malcolm.
Good morning.
How are
Great
you?
To be with you?
Yeah,
I'm doing well, thank you.
Busy day here and a lot of questions. How is this constitutional?
Well, the argument will be that the jury has to unanimously find that he entered a false business record for the purpose of committing another crime, but they other than showing that he had to have an intent to commit another crime, they don't have to be unanimous as to what that crime is. I think that's a bad argument, but that will be the argument. I think in this case, it says you have to have an intent to commit another crime, which implies that it's a specific crime. Here, what the judge has said, well, you might think he committed a federal campaign finance violation. You might think he violated the tax laws. You might think he might have done this in order to enter some other false business record onto the company's books. You pick, and you don't have to be unanimous. If four of you like one, that's fine, and two of you like another, that's fine, and six of you like the third one, that's fine. I think that's a real problem, and I think if Donald Trump is convicted, I still have a hard time seeing that, but if he is, that will certainly be one of the major issues that he will raise on appeal, and it will be one of many.
Well, I mean, Fox News was reporting that Judge Merchan told the jury that obviously they don't need that this is what they could do. Four could agree on one crime, four on a different one, and the other four on another. He said he would treat 4-4-4 as a unanimous verdict.
Wow.
Is this ever happened before? Or am I just I've been watching too many Matlock episodes?
So just to be clear, they do have to be unanimous on one thing.
What?
They have to be unanimous that Donald Trump caused a false business entry to be made on the books for the purpose of committing another crime. They have to be unanimous on that. What they don't have to be unanimous on is what the other crime was. What converted this from a misdemeanor, normally a false entry on a business record is a misdemeanor offense, to a felony, is that it was done for the purpose of concealing another crime.
Well, what's that
So-
other crime?
There's no underlying.
Well, that's the part where he said he gave them an array of options and said, you have to be unanimous that it was a false business entry for the purpose of committing another crime, but you do not have to be unanimous as to what that other crime was. You all have to believe that he did it because he intended to commit another crime, but here are a list of potential crimes. You pick. You don't have to be unanimous with respect to that.
Okay, well, was the jury shown hard evidence of a crime?
I personally have a large degree of trouble with the prosecution's entire theory of this case. It is premised on essentially that this payment to Michael Cohen to reimburse him for the payment to Stormy Daniels, that this was somehow he intended to commit a tax violation or he intended to violate campaign finance laws. Donald Trump wanted to call Brad Smith, who's a former federal election commissioner, to say if he had actually made this payment with campaign funds, that would have been a violation of law because this wasn't a campaign expenditure. It was a personal expenditure. He was settling a personal dispute out of his own funds. So I think the entire theory that this is somehow a campaign finance violation is completely bogus. That will be another issue that will be raised on appeal.
Yep.
One, was this a crime? And two, Judge Merchan was going to limit what Brad Smith could say so much that the Trump team decided not to call him. It just wasn't worth it.
Yeah. And John, let's talk about not allowing certain people to testify. The FEC chairman, Cohen's a former attorney. What do you think? How would that play as it relates to the appeal that I'm sure Trump and I'm sure this is going to probably go straight to the Supreme Court. What do you think?
Well, it's not going to go to the Supreme Court. It's going to work its way up the appellate chain in New York if he is convicted. Robert Costello did testify. That was Cohen's former attorney, but the judge sustained a number of objections when he was asked questions. Brad Smith simply didn't testify because all the judge said was, I'll let him talk about what the Federal Election Commission does. I'll let him speak generally about campaign finance laws, but he can't talk about whether what Trump did was a campaign finance violation or not. The prosecution said, oh, well, we'll call an expert, and this will just bog the trial down and turn into a battle of the experts. Sometimes that is the case. I mean, if you have a federal election commissioner who knows more about campaign finance laws than perhaps anybody on the planet saying, look, this is a pretty clear-cut case. This was not a campaign expenditure. This was a personal expenditure, and therefore there was no federal campaign finance violation. By the way, both the Department of Justice and the Federal Election Commission independently looked into this expenditure and decided not to proceed with either a prosecution or some kind of a civil fine. Yeah. So that will be among many issues. Was this a crime? Should Judge Merchan have recused himself in the first place?
Yes.
Did he allow Stormy Daniels to go too far in terms of testifying about an affair which really had nothing to do with, this payment? It may have prompted the payment, but that's not a crime. Having an affair, assuming that he did with a porn star, is not a crime under New York law or federal law. There are all kinds of issues that are going to be raised if he is convicted.
Yeah.
I still believe the odds are high that this jury is going to end up being a hung jury. I just have a hard time believing that all 12 of these jurors are going to believe what came out of Michael Cohen's mouth.
Yeah, I do know that Mark Levin interviewed President Trump yesterday. The first thing he said, take it straight to the Supreme Court. But do you? And there was a
Does
question.
Does it work that way though?
Well, I don't.
Doesn't you have to go to the state Supreme Court and then?
Right, but I mean that wasn't my
question. In New York, it's actually a little unusual because the lower court, Judge Merchan, is a state Supreme Court justice.
Oh, that's
it's
right.
The one,
That's right.
The Supreme Court is the lowest court, so it would work its way up to the New York Court of Appeals, all the two higher appeal levels in New York. And then if there's a federal issue, I suppose you could take it to the U.S. Supreme Court. But the U.S. Supreme Court would not be the first stop.
Correct.
If Donald Trump is in fact convicted.
We had a caller call in and ask this question. Could Trump, should he win, could his DOJ investigate Judge Merchan?
Yeah, I'm not sure what for. He may have been a really
maybe
shoddy.
collusion. Because maybe collusion.
Well, you'd have to really prove that he was somehow on the take or sending tips to the prosecutors. I mean, you can make a very plausible argument that Judge Merchan has effectively been another prosecutor in terms of some of his rulings. But in order to convict somebody of a crime, you have to prove that they really did it with a corrupt intent, not just because they're either a bad judge or don't like Donald Trump. It's, they worked it out with the prosecutors ahead of time. Don't worry, I'm going to rule in your favor on all of these things. I suppose someone could you can investigate anything. I have a hard time believing that would stick, and I say that as a former federal prosecutor.
Yeah. How will what happened in the Harvey Weinstein case affect this case with Judge Merchan and Trump, and how it was overturned?
I'm not sure that there's a connection. I'd have to go back and look at exactly why they overturned Harvey Weinstein's conviction. I think it had to do with the fact that he admitted a lot of evidence of alleged assaults against other women that was somehow not tied
to the case.
He was convicted. And I'm not sure there's an analogy, but I frankly haven't looked at the Harvey Weinstein case and why that was overturned with enough rigor to be able to answer your question.
Okay, so do you think it's possible, because it is Friday afternoon, people, juries like to wrap it up before the weekend, that they could reach a verdict by this afternoon?
Well, today's Thursday, so they would have
today's Thursday. I'm so sorry.
A couple of days. No, that's all right. I think that the odds are high that they will reach a verdict by the end of tomorrow.
Right.
I don't know whether they'll reach a verdict by the end of today.
And then what happens then? I know the verdict's in, and both sides have a certain set amount of time to get to the courtroom. Could Trump be thrown in jail or home arrest?
Could he be? Yes. Will he be? I sincerely doubt it. So let's assume for the moment that the jury convicts.
Okay.
I assume that what will happen is, Donald Trump's a well-known figure. Where is he going to flee to? I assume that what will happen is the judge will say, okay, I'm going to order a sentencing report. We're going to have a sentencing in 5 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that. Mm-hmm. And then even if he brings him back and decides to sentence him, and even if he sentences to some jail time or home confinement, there are enough appeal issues here that I'm assuming that the judge would issue him an appeal bond and say, okay, you're going to remain free pending appeal. But the judge would certainly have the authority, if he wanted to say, okay, you're now a convicted felon, take him into custody. I would be shocked if he did that. I think the world would be shocked if he did that. I think if he did, it would conceivably redound to Donald Trump's advantage in the same way that Vivek Ramaswamy said it would in your lead-in. So I don't expect that to happen.
I think there'd be riots. If they threw him in jail, I think that would be
while he's running for president, I think that's correct.
Yeah.
So, what about the other cases that are still pending? I know the records case, the presidential records case in Florida, has been pretty much put on hold indefinitely. But what about Georgia?
Look, I don't think that any of these cases, the other ones, are going to get tried before the election. There are still, I think, something like 13 defendants in that Georgia case.
Oh, yeah.
Donnie Willis has appealed Judge McAfee's dismissal of some of the counts against Donald Trump. Donald Trump and his co-defendants are appealing the judge's denial of the motion to have her entire office recused from the case. The Court of Appeals has decided to hear these cases. Whatever the Court of Appeals does, it's going to go up then to the Georgia Supreme Court. I just don't think there's any way that this case is going to get tried before the election. The only one that could conceivably get tried would be the D.C. case, but there are issues. The entire presidential immunity issue is up before the Supreme Court. They're going to issue their opinion within a month. I'll bet you whatever standard they set, they're going to remand it back to the trial court for evidentiary hearings. This thing is going to play out. I just don't see any of these other cases going to trial between now and Election Day.
Yeah, I want to shift really quickly. I want to talk about what's happening at the Supreme Court. You look at Justice Alito and how they're trying to force him to recuse himself because his wife hung an American flag upside down.
Yeah, for a few days.
Right. You think about Kagan when Justice Kagan, when she didn't recuse herself from a case. She actually, I believe, she was the Solicitor General on. What's the real reason the left's coming after the U.S. Supreme Court like this?
Well, I do want to correct one thing, which is I think that Justice Kagan did recuse herself from one case.
She did. Well, one of them she did.
But there are several. But look, I could give you lots of cases involving Stephen Breyer and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that if Donald Trump won the election, that she was going to leave the country.
Yeah.
Right.
And yet she did not recuse herself from a single case involving Donald Trump. The reason is because the left is upset at the direction in which the Supreme Court is going, and they realize that there's a 6-3 conservative majority. Sometimes you can peel off, the liberals can peel off a justice, which make it 5-4. If you can knock out a Samuel Alito or a Clarence Thomas, there are only 9 of them. So, 1, the odds of your winning the particular case go up. And 2, you get to tarnish the reputation of a Supreme Court that you don't particularly like in the public's eye by saying, look at all of these unethical slobs that are sitting up there on the Supreme Court refusing to recuse themselves. The fix is in. This is a bunch of nonsense, of course. Justice Alito wrote a letter answering for himself to Dick Durbin and Sheldon Whitehouse yesterday. I thought it was a very effective letter.
Yes.
Some of my friends think that he should have just said, I'm not answering you. I'm a separate branch of government. Have a nice day. Leave me alone. But Justice Alito chose to write a response, and I thought it was a very well crafted.
He's fiery. That's why.
But, and also said, my wife is a citizen, and she has her right to free speech.
Correct.
Yeah, no, that is correct. And Clarence Thomas has had to say the same thing about Ginny Thomas many, many times. They are independent people with their own views, and there is certainly nothing about either flying a flag upside down for a few days, which has a rich history of being a distress call, or a flag
it's MAGA.
appeal to heaven, which goes back to the Revolutionary War. But oh no, this was all tied somehow to stop the steal, and it's nefarious, and it's a bunch of hogwash.
Everything's tied to MAGA now. Everything's tied to MAGA now.
An insurrection that he was never charged with. All right, John Malcolm, former federal prosecutor, Heritage Foundation's vice president for the Institute for Constitutional Government. Thank you so much for joining us. You can follow him on Twitter at Malcolm_John. Yeah. Mr. Malcolm, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
A storm is on the horizon, and you need to keep the lights on no matter what. Your business relies on the power being on 24/7. It's the lifeblood of your data and computer systems. Weather-related outages from the power company are not acceptable. Your need for a source of power that's reliable 24/7, along with round-the-clock service that can dispatch technicians to your site immediately, is mission critical. Your business needs Charles Equipment Energy Systems on speed dial. These are the big boys, not residential or solar, but reliable industrial generators for emergency backup or events. When you need more than a 100-foot extension cord plugged into a small engine generator, call Charles Equipment Energy Systems. They keep the lights on with rental generators for job sites or power outages. The storm season is here. Plan ahead. Call now to prepare generators for sudden damage and potential power outages. Call 630-834-6000.